Welcome to this explainer of our source material. Today, we're jumping straight into a genuinely dark and honestly, absolutely fascinating story. We're unpacking the life of a man whose deeply esoteric philosophy secretly built the very foundation of modern pop culture. We're talking about Aleister Crowley. And to really understand this guy, we actually have to start at the edge of the world. Picture the year 1902. We're on the freezing, uncharted slopes of Mount K2 in Baltistan. At this point in history, no human had ever set foot on K2. It's a massive expedition, 200 porters, a Swiss doctor, seasoned Austrian climbers. But right there among them is this highly unusual English climber named Aleister Crowley. As they hit extreme altitudes, total disaster strikes. The expedition leader falls ill with a respiratory disease, and Crowley gets gripped by severe malaria. The fever was so intense, he fell into this deep, deep delirium. And in a moment of pure madness, Crowley actually drew his revolver and pointed it directly at his own team members, literally the very people trying to save his life. It's this profound contradiction, you know? He had actually dragged an entire library of books with him up this massive glacier. When the other climbers practically begged him to leave the heavy books behind, he just flat out refused. He said they were his only connection to civilization, and without them, he'd become a savage. And yet, that delirium on K2 changed him fundamentally. Whatever he experienced in that intense fever dream completely altered his trajectory. Because when he finally came down that mountain, he was not the same man. He descended with a lifelong devotion to Shiva, the Hindu deity of destruction. But let's rewind a bit, because even before that fateful climb, Crowley was constantly searching for something way beyond the ordinary. Back in 1898, he joined the famous Golden Dawn secret society. That's where he famously feuded with the legendary poet W.B. Yeats. But he was totally dissatisfied just being a regular member, so he traveled all over the world from 1900 to 1902. Mexico, Japan, Sri Lanka, India, just completely immersing himself in yoga and meditation. The real breaking point, though, came in 1905, during another mountain expedition, this time to Kanchenjunga. Crowley was the leader here, and his true nature really came out. A sudden avalanche struck, tragically killing 3 porters and 1 team member. And Crowley? He coldly refused to even leave his tent to help the survivors. He literally just sat there drinking tea, later stating he had absolutely no sympathy for mountain accidents. After that horrifying day, he abandoned mountaineering completely and fully gave his life over to the occult. So you're probably wondering, how does someone arrive at that level of absolute cold detachment? Well, we have to look back at his childhood. Born in 1875 in Leamington Spa, England, Edward Alexander Crowley was raised in an incredibly strict Christian sect called the Plymouth Brethren. We're talking about an environment of absolute rigid control. Novels, banned. Games, forbidden. You couldn't even have friends outside the faith. It was just prayer and this deep-seated fear. But then a massive shift happens. His father dies when Crowley is just 11 years old, leaving him this immense inheritance. All of a sudden, a boy who was raised in absolute restriction has absolute financial freedom and absolutely zero guidance. And this brings us to a really shocking detail from his upbringing. Crowley was, understandably, highly rebellious. And as a punishment, his own mother used to call him the Beast. Now, this wasn't just some generic insult. She was directly referencing the beast from the biblical book of Revelation. Just imagine the psychological impact of that for a second. Your own mother cursing you with the title of the ultimate biblical evil. That creates a massive psychological fork in the road for a kid. You're either going to break completely under that incredible weight, or you're going to completely lean into it. Well, Crowley chose to lean into it. Hard. He took the number 666, the number of the Antichrist, and adopted it as his own core identity. He used this incredibly dark persona to aggressively rebel against his strict, fear-based past. He didn't just want to escape his upbringing, you know? He developed this intense hunger to completely upend it by creating an entirely new religion, with himself right at the very center. This massive ambition culminated in what's known as the Cairo Revelation. Fast forward to 1904. Crowley and his new wife, Rose, are on their honeymoon in Egypt. Now, it's absolutely crucial to note that Rose had zero background or interest in the occult, none whatsoever. Yet, one night, she inexplicably falls into a deep trance and tells him, "They are waiting for you." When he presses her on it, this woman with absolutely no knowledge of Egyptian mythology identifies the falcon-headed god, Horus. And that kicked off a bizarre 3-day supernatural encounter that would literally change occult history forever. To test his wife's sudden revolution, Crowley takes her to a museum in Cairo. And out of all the thousands of artifacts there, she points directly to an ancient Egyptian wooden tablet, known today as the Stele of Revealing, which prominently featured an image of Horus. But here is the crazy part. When Crowley looked at the museum's catalog number for that specific artifact, it was exactly 666. No way, right? The very number his mother had cursed him with as a child was officially attached to the exact artifact his wife was mysteriously drawn to. Following that wild museum visit, Crowley claimed that from April 8th to the 10th in 1904, a disembodied entity named Aiwass spoke to him right there in his hotel room. He said that for exactly 1 hour each day, right between noon and 1 p.m., this entity dictated a text to him. Over those 3 days, Crowley furiously wrote down 3 chapters. He titled this work Liber il vel Legis, which translates to the Book of the Law. And right here is where we find the absolute core of Crowley's philosophy, all distilled into one immensely energetic and, frankly, destructive sentence. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. It was a radically defiant doctrine. It promoted a worldview with absolutely zero restrictions. No halal, no haram, no moral accountability whatsoever, and absolutely no higher deity to answer to. The philosophy dictates that you simply do whatever your heart and desires command, which effectively makes the individual their own god. Crowley actually turned this single sentence into a full-fledged religion, which he named Thelema. Now, Thelema comes from a Greek word meaning will or intention. So the man whose mother cursed him as the beast now boldly stepped forward and declared himself the prophet of this entirely new desire-driven faith. He wasn't just rebelling anymore, he was literally building an institution of self-worship. Of course, this philosophy required a complete rewrite of human history. Crowley claimed that the Eon of Osiris, which was his term for the era of past prophets like Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, characterized by submission to a higher power, was now officially over, done. In its place, he declared the dawn of the Eon of Horus. In this brand new era, absolute freedom and personal will reign supreme. The idea of bowing to any traditional religious structure is completely replaced by bowing only to your own personal desires. But look, a prophet without followers is just a guy with a book, right? Crowley knew his philosophy needed a serious vehicle to survive and spread. So instead of starting entirely from scratch, he took over an existing secret society called the Ordo Templi Orientis, or the O.T.O. And hey, this isn't just ancient history. The O.T.O. remains highly active today. There are members across America, Europe, and Australia who still actively practice his specific rituals and read his texts. Yet, despite boldly declaring himself a prophet, his physical life ended in stark contrast to his massive ambitions. On December 1st, 1947, Crowley died at the age of 72 in a cheap, rundown boarding house in Hastings, England. He was completely bankrupt, his followers had mostly abandoned him, and he was heavily addicted to heroin, which was originally prescribed for his asthma. But there is a really startling juxtaposition here. While his physical life ended in total isolation, his posthumous legacy absolutely exploded. Decades after his miserable death, he became a massive idol for some of the biggest icons in global pop culture. That explosive posthumous legacy found its perfect vessel in the music industry. Think about this. 20 years after he died broke and alone, the Beatles prominently placed Crowley's face right on the cover of their iconic 1967 album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The very next year, Led Zeppelin's legendary guitarist, Jimmy Page, actually bought Crowley's former house on the shores of Loch Ness and spent an absolute fortune collecting his occult artifacts. In 1969, Ozzy Osbourne released his famous tribute track, Mr. Crowley. David Bowie referenced him directly in the song Quicksand, and Black Sabbath integrated his core concepts into their music. The biggest names in rock and roll were actively resurrecting the philosophy of the beast. So how on earth did this happen? Why did these massive global musicians gravitate toward him of all people? Well, it actually traces back to a manual Crowley wrote way back in 1913 called Magick in Theory and Practice. In it, he explicitly laid out a strategy. If you disguise occult rituals as pure entertainment, people will naturally drop their defenses and just submit to their own base desires. By wrapping his do-what-you-want philosophy in the super appealing package of music, fashion, and pop culture, his ideas completely bypassed our logic and went straight into the mainstream subconscious. Which leaves us with a deeply provocative question to chew on today. When we hear the modern mantra of do whatever makes you feel good or live your own truth without any boundaries, is it really just innocent self-empowerment? Or when we consume modern media and listen to today's biggest influencers, are we actually unknowingly living by the hidden law of the beast? It's definitely something to think deeply about as we navigate the pop culture all around us. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive into our source material, and always keep questioning what you see.